now have the privilege of introducing to the students someone who is a friend, guide, mentor for so many of us at Nalsar, especially the younger lot. And I'm talking about Professor Amita Thanda. And when I use the words friend, guide, mentor to describe her place in our lives at Nalsar, I do that with full realization that these words may not be doing justice to her role in shaping the moral and the intellectual outlook of the university. But I have to reconcile with the fact that vocabulary has its limitations. Therefore, I invite now Professor Amita Dhanda to talk to the students and also introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Paramita Vora. Ma'am.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. Well, they tell you that technology has a way of kind of tripping you up at critical times. So my computer has been playing all sorts of games with me because I suppose I was especially keen to be introducing Paramita Vora to you. I also wanted to carry on, from where Professor Balakista Reddy left, to tell you that no, Nalsar does all these things. It's true, we do them. But beyond that, what Nalsar is kind of about is to tell you that there is a life which is larger than law. That yes, you are coming into a law university, but in a law university, you can be functioning to optimum if you put that law and your career in context. If you sort of see to it that yes, law spells the connection between, say, law and justice, the connection between law and life, and with Paramita there, I would say between law and love. It's so very important to be making those connections. And if we are wanting to orient you to the philosophy and ideology of the university, this year, when for the first time we have started this practice of having a commencement address, we had to think who we should invite to do that commencement address. And, because we are talking in terms of that, don't look at law as only logic. Also think about the law with your heart. Also think about the people who are affected by it. Don't look just at appearances. Also look behind the appearances. Look beyond the appearances. There is an inside and outside all the time in the law. I could not think of, nobody at all could think of a better person than Paramita to come and do this commencement address for us. When you sort of it's like the films that she makes, the writing that she does is all about nuance, about gloss, about the subtlety of meaning, that there are so many meanings within meanings. When so many of you in the younger lot, when you start to do your criminal law, I would say that look at the Lavani that Paramita has made on the whole issue of consent. It demonstrates to you exactly how nuanced is the whole phenomena of consent. And it's not just a black and white thing. It's about the whole yes and no's and maybes and the way in which human relationships operate. And that entire subtlety, Paramita brings not just to that particular video that she has done or that Lavani that she has done. Similarly, when you look at intellectual property, her partners in crime is like mandatory viewing. We use it, Paramita, as a part of our research methodology course to be telling, students exactly how very, black and white you try to portray the whole event of business of authorship and ownership be, and how exactly nuanced it is. And it's for her writings, for her films, for her views. It's a whole range of things that Paramita does. It's like, I think I would sort of borrow from Saurabh and say, I don't have the words to describe all of it. More importantly, in an orientation at a commencement address, and as such, as you all are starting your careers as both LL.B and LL.M students, I think all of us require models, require people we can follow, who can advise us, people who would at least, I wouldn't say become like them, but who will help us to become the best versions of ourselves. And I think Paramita, for me, is one of the foremost public intellectuals of India at this point, the kind of person we require with that sort of both intellect and empathy, both humanity as well as, it's not like there's any shortage of reason there, but that reason is tempered with a lot of humanness. And it's for all of these qualities that I have, and I feel that Nalsar is really honored to start its commencement address series with Paramita Vora. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Paramita Vora.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Professor Dhanda. Actually, now I'm almost in tears, which is not a good beginning. But I think that, you know, it's an introduction which was full of so much love that it really mattered to me more than any other kind. So hi to everybody whom I can't see because of the pandemic and the limitations of technology. And thank you for inviting me to talk today as a number of students are beginning an important part of their lives. You know, even though I'm now a fully vaccinated and fully grown-up person, the idea of giving a commencement address brought out the full force of my imposter syndrome. And I started thinking, like, how can I be giving a commencement address? I'm still muddling through my life, and what can I tell others? And also, in truth, I'm a little bit scared of speeches because I feel very scared that they'll be boring. I hate to be bored and I hate to bore others. So I thought, you know, what I do love and what has always given me a lot of wisdom to learn from is songs. I love songs because of their simplicity, their generosity of spirit, which includes everyone through pleasure, and their ability to say profound things in easy words, in rhyming words sometimes. So I'm going to begin today with a song, one of my favorite Hindi film songs from a film from 1964 called Choti Choti Baatein. And I just want to clarify that in 1964, I know that most of you weren't born, but I was also not born. So I'm not as old as I'm saying I am. But this is a song that has resonated for me through the decades. कुछ और ज़माना कहता है, कुछ और है जिद मेरे दिल की, मैं बात ज़माने की मानूं या बात सुनूं अपने दिल की, कुछ और ज़माना कहता है. Now, for those of you who don't follow Hindustani, or those of you who got so shocked that I started singing at a commencement address and could not listen to the words, I'm going to translate. The world says one thing, kuch aur zamana kehta hai, but my heart insists on another. Should I follow the world's instructions, or should I pay heed to the voice of my heart? Baat dil ki, the voice of the heart. What is it really? I don't use this phrase in some touchy-feely way. For me, the voice of the heart is a deeply political thing, and it is also a deeply contemporary thing because it is the voice that responds to today, what is happening around us, while the instructions of the world are often yesterday's instructions being force-fitted into today. The Dil Ki Baat is an intellectual voice, it is an emotional voice, it is a visceral voice, and also often, though not always, a wise voice. It is a voice we are often told to ignore as trivial, as untrustworthy, because it is emotional. But the voice of the heart is not only about listening to yourself, it is also about listening to the voice of other people's hearts. And I'll explain what I mean practically by telling you a story. It's the story of a woman called Priya Zagare, and I read the story in 2010. In 2010, I had been asked to write a weekly column in a newspaper, and I felt at that time exactly as I'm feeling right now. Okay, who am I to be writing a newspaper column? I don't have a PhD. I don't even know how to tie a sari properly. I'm not a proper grown-up. And then I read the story of Priya Zagare. It was a small item in a local tabloid. And it's one of the many choti choti baatein that has shown me a different world and given me a confidence in my beliefs. 40-year-old Priya Zagare was a receptionist, paralyzed from the waist down, whose husband, Pradeep Zagare, a fireman, had recently died in a work accident. She had been given a compensation check of 16 lakh rupees, but she had refused to deposit it. She wanted a probe into the alleged infrastructural irregularities in the fire department that she felt had caused her husband's death. But she also wanted somebody in the system to come and meet her. She had sought appointments with officials from the municipality and the fire department, but they were either too busy or too unwilling to meet her, and perhaps they felt, well, we've given her compensation, so we don't owe her anything else. In the news story that I read, Ms. Zagari talked at length about her late husband. And what I read revealed a deep and moving story. The two of them had grown up in the same chawl. A chawl is a tenement housing block in Bombay. And it's mostly working class and lower middle class people who live there. And they were childhood sweethearts. As Priya Zagari had a locomotive disability, her husband had built on his own a special ramp that would help her to negotiate their building steps, because chawls are normally 4 floors and they don't have a lift. I thought as I read that perhaps this sort of love is a kind of great justice. It is a proof that we matter in a world of dispensable numbers. It is love that balances out the hardships of life by thinking of what loved ones need. We all know what it is to be bereft and betrayed when love is taken from us. And when someone dies, we often insist that there is some other reason that has caused it, not just a misfortune of human tragedy. And it's actually unclear whether there was a genuine functional problem that led to the fireman's death. Perhaps there wasn't. And surely by providing compensation, the state had done its job. But the fact that senior department people would not give her an ear also points to a strange, almost childish evasion that has increasingly become common in our society, that we see all around us in our public culture. We see a lot of social media outrage about rights and wrongs, but we struggle if we want to hear a voice of compassion and sympathy and openness. And often we use the language of law, of right and wrongdoing, because we do not have a public language for the many dimensions of human experience, including loss and love. The system does not or cannot recognize that emotional ravaging is an equally fundamental part of loss, because it seems materially non-compensable. Numbers and measurements seem recognizable and tangible, and they help us to feel reassured that we have done something or achieved something, whether it be success or justice. But how should we measure the baat dil ki, the voice of the heart? Perhaps the response is not that we must measure it, but rather value it, not through measurement, but by paying attention to it. Is there a way for us to build kindness into procedures? Because procedures are usually about power, not kindness. Is there a way to affirm through the way that we design systems, shape our plans, and make our moves, that systems are meant for people, and people are diverse in their histories, their identities, their advantages and disadvantages, but also in their emotions and experiences and desires? To rephrase a famous dialogue from the film Love Story and also the film Maine Pyar Kiya, sometimes love is a matter of saying you're sorry, because sorry is not an admission of guilt, which is how we are taught to think about things in the world and about this word, but it's also a way of recognizing someone's pain, loss, or disappointment. It is a way of giving shape and recognition to the many things that are unspoken but are still real, like our emotions. The look of love allows you to see the emotional along with the material. And so it is a look we must cultivate in ourselves, because this look recognizes the baat dil ki. It is not something the world encourages us to do, because it requires us to be vulnerable instead of always in control. Hence, it is a superpower to look at the world and at ourselves and at others with love and attention. At the time that I read this story about Priya Zagare, I also read the story of an MLA who was advocating to start spirituality camps in the Legislative Council. I was intrigued at the idea of, all our MLAs meditating in assembly. But then I read about why he wanted to do it. And he said he felt this would be a way for members to not be caught up in what he termed petty issues like caste and language. But after all, in politics, caste and language, gender and community are indeed important questions, which don't need to be silenced, but need to be listened to as well. Spirituality isn't as simple as lighting a candle to silence these questions. To feel one with the world, we cannot magically meditate away our differences. Rather, it is a question of being able to listen to those differences when they are spoken. And so to hear what is spoken with an open heart, just as we must find a way to listen to what is unspoken. In a manga series about the life of Buddha by the Japanese artist Tezuka, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend, one of the things I found most notable was that the Buddha was never depicted only in terms of his beatific enlightenment. We're so used to seeing the Buddha in this peaceful kind of form, But in that comic, actually, his beatitude is frequently, right till the end of his life, ruptured by the suffering that comes from compassion in the face of injustice. At no point does his spirituality disconnect him actually from the materiality of life around. So perhaps justice, like love, means looking the truth in the eye and recognizing it in all its complexity. And because I'm an artist and I'm very practical, what does all this mean in practical terms? Well, the two stories that I read at that time became the focus of the first column I ever wrote. They seemed like such small stories, choti choti baatein. But my heart felt that they really spoke an important truth, which I did not see reflected in our newspapers and then in the discourse of public intellectuals, because it was not considered lofty enough, little item that too in a tabloid newspaper. I did feel worried, like, would people think I was silly to write about these things? Maybe they would have, but I felt they mattered, so I took the plunge. And many people wrote to me after that to say, I had also read the story of that woman and I kept thinking about it afterwards. So thank you for writing about it. So in a way, I got to listen to the voice of Priya Zagare's heart. I thank the journalist who decided to write about that story. And I listened to the voice of my own heart as a result, that this is important. And I wrote about it. And then when people responded, it helped me to hear the voice of other people's hearts. And together, as a writer and her readers, we actually gave each other a deep confidence in our own beliefs. It is 11 years since I wrote that column, and this relationship of love and emotional confidence between myself, readers, and the people whose lives I come to learn about has revealed itself to be an intrinsic part of thinking about rights and justice, and a place of, I would call it mulayam strength, because strength isn't always about being hard. It's about being flexible and open to change, right? So a mulayam strength for doing that even more difficult thing, being able to listen to a contrary point of view, the voice of an angry or even unkind heart without panic and fear and denial. Listening to the voice of your heart lets you create something new, something that wasn't there before. And sometimes it helps you to cross boundaries that you didn't believe that you could cross. This look of love, which is often, because I'm a feminist, people often ask me, what is the definition of feminism? And I often say that feminism is the look of love, because it is the ability to pay attention to those things that the world does not consider important or major. It is the trust in yourself to make something from that observation and learning. From those choti choti baatein, I have built my work, and I have had the chance to learn, therefore, big truths and see larger stories about life and justice and the world. The look of love and the voice of the heart can give value to that which the world does not have the means to recognize or to count. I would like to ask another practical question, because actually life isn't about answers. I always feel it's about finding the really interesting questions that will reveal something to us. Why don't we find it easy to listen to and understand the voice in our hearts? Because I know that many of you who are listening to me will say these words sound good, but that's not how it works in life. And we are all used to being told that that's not how it really works. So to understand the question of why we find it difficult, let's ask the question in another way. How do we as children learn to become adults? I think most of us are taught to do this by learning how to fit into the world. That is what adulthood is described to us as. And that often means curating a part of ourselves that is acceptable to the world. It means we are constantly encouraged to strengthen those parts we think will help us to become accepted, to become successful adults. And we label the other parts of ourselves as superfluous, as extra, as doubtful, or as not worthwhile. So if we stop to think about it, those parts that we are taught to minimize and reduce are usually those that are pleasurable and also painful. Those parts that are emotional, sexual, the world of desires, longing, confusion, pleasure, doubt, pain, feelings. We see these parts variously as taboo, as inefficient, or as a weakness. They are meant to be controlled in order for us to fit into the world and perhaps to dominate it. There is something these parts have in common, these so stigmatized parts of ourselves. And that commonality is that they cannot be counted. And because they cannot be counted, they also cannot be controlled. But if we cannot count something, does that mean it does not count? Is a question I often ask myself. I think it is harder to have confidence in the things that can't be counted. But if one can gather that confidence, one can gather a strength that is almost unimaginable. But if we are taught, if we are being taught, and if we are being trained to belong in the world, or even mostly given chances to fit into a world that is in itself that in itself creates inequality and injustice and exclusion, are we really helping to create an equal world? Is the question. Are we simply reproducing the world's inequalities when we do that while imagining that we are not? As importantly, can we really imagine equality and justice if we not only treat parts of society as lesser and stigmatize and marginalize it, but also stigmatize, marginalize, and look down on parts of ourselves as well? When we treat parts of the human being as unequal, can we imagine equality, let alone practice it? If we edit out parts of ourselves that don't fit into the world and are able to be included in a homogeneous and homogenizing system, can we really imagine or practice inclusion and heterogeneity? If our definition of inclusion is merely a technical one, checking the boxes of how many identities we have included without being changed or transformed by those differences we encounter, can the system really be an inclusive one? Because then we're simply like gatekeepers allowing people into an old system while leaving somebody else out, right? So is every inclusion inevitably going to leave somebody or something out? And is our practice for inclusion therefore actually based on an idea of exclusion? These are important questions that we may find hard to answer, but a part of the joy of these questions is that the answer is always changing and always revealing to us new paths that we can take in order to become better people, but also to become full people, not just better, but like whole persons. To be an adult is to become a person, the person that you are, and not simply to become a successful version of somebody else's idea of grown-upness, right? So the singer Bob Dylan has sung, "To live outside the law, you must be honest." I used to always wonder what this line meant, right? Like I used to think, is it like honor amongst thieves? But I understood over time that what it really says is that when you are not being forced to be honest because there is a law that keeps you in place, what kind of honesties will you find? What could you understand about the world when somebody else didn't tell you how it should be understood? And I think to understand that, one can only do it by really, really paying attention to what your heart is telling you about what is around you. For those of us who want to think about helping others through our work, these questions are the heart of the matter, the dil ki asli baat. How will we listen to other people? Sometimes we like to bring out stories of powerlessness and listen to negative experiences because we feel by doing that, we are somehow helping others. But maybe we could also ask ourselves the question that if we are always listening to stories of powerlessness and negative experiences and making that other people's reality, are we just doing it to confirm that we are good people or to help other people? Are we just doing it to have tangible proof that we are uplifting someone through our work, for confirming that we are superior? Then those people will have to always be permanently powerless victims so that we can be permanently powerful saviors, right? So how can we find a way to see the struggles of people, but also the wisdom of people as we do our work with others? How will we see people not only in terms of what they lack, but also in terms of what they are capable of doing, what they dream of, not just their needs, but also their desires? There's only one place that really allows us to do it, and it is the world of love, emotions, art, poetry, and culture, which enable us to see people as multifaceted. This is the gaze that helps us move beyond inequality and become co-travelers in a journey of change with other people. As an artist, of course, my work is to work with these intangibles and to manifest what is yet being experienced into something concrete and visible. But I do not believe it's just the work of artists. Rather, it is the work of art. Art is the place which instructs us, every single one of us, and which teaches us to hear these many different voices of many hearts. It is through art that we get confidence in the voice of our heart and the observation that we are sensing, even if we can't see. And it is through poetry, music, storytelling, documentary film, that art bears witness to our experiences and what new questions and newer answers those experiences bring before us. What could we learn if we paid attention to these parts of the self and the world? This is the question that I asked myself when we started Agents of Ishq, which is a multimedia platform about sexual life and rights that we run, which is a digital project. It's on the internet, so you can easily look it up. We created a space that was not constructed based on people's oppression and loss alone, but also on the beauty, the pleasure, and the experiences of people. It was a place about sexual and health and rights, but it was also about sexual desire, the world of emotions and feelings and doubts and confusions. Information, education, enjoyment, pleasure, emotion, sex, love, desire, rights, relationships. All of these are treated equally and given equal place and importance. You will hear the word agency very often in the 5 years that you will study, and words like agency are easily bandied about by us. But the meanings of words sometimes can become automatic, and then the words don't keep up with the times, right? That's why both the professors who preceded my talk stressed that vocabulary sometimes not enough, because sometimes we need new words to talk about our experiences, and the old words or their old meanings are insufficient. So maybe I think it's a good idea from time to time to ask ourselves a new question about an old word, or to ask that question in a place which is not expected, because we might see something we couldn't see otherwise. Janaki, I asked myself, what does it mean to be an agent of Ishq? I defined my answer in one way. To me, it meant creating a space that would be an inclusive frame that would accommodate infinite experiences, that would have no limit, but in which experiences would continuously be added and continuously be understood. And those experiences would continuously redefine how we understand the world and ourselves. But that was my definition. We also asked the question of the people in our audience. We asked that question to other people. What does it mean to you to be an agent of Ishq? And their answers were all different. All their answers are what have made up the website today. And it has become a space where people come together to share their dil ki baat, but also to listen to other people's dil ki baatein. And so co-create a new language to talk about private life. Most of us are used to being told or telling others what is good for them. But the truth is, all people struggle to carve out a life for themselves, one that is about health and wealth, mark sheets, pay packages, but also happiness, self-expression, and relationships. The experiences that people have shared on Agents of Ishq, whether joyful or painful, are a place of rich wisdom and learning. The wisdom of people's experiences continuously reshapes the work we do, and it gives us the most important gift of all, a way to ask new questions so that we may hear new answers. It is the co-creation of a new language of the heart, which is about love and pleasure, about vulnerability and kindness, also about people's histories, identities, and experiences. It's about honesty and radical acceptance. And all of these things, therefore, I think, are about justice. In this space, we have tried to create human experience and private life are seen as a place of strength and knowledge, where you don't check in with the identity card, which is how the system or the government or the law or society see you alone, while keep half of your complex human self out of the picture. Rather, we bring the whole of us to the moment, how the world sees us, as well as how we see ourselves and how we would like to be seen. We bring all of that to the moment and ask to be respected for that as a whole. I believe that justice allows us to be who we are and to be respected in that way. If we cannot accept people as complex wholes, but treat them as innumerable, quantifiable commodities alone, we cannot truly imagine a diverse world, because the frame we are fitting people in is one of sameness, and a single story creates a world of absolute rights and wrongs, aggression and power, blame and judgment. It makes us think that disagreement is invalidation and agreement means subsuming ourselves. But a language of inclusion and love which honors the human experiences and gives it dignity through art and offerings of pleasure and enjoyment creates a confidence in ourselves, a belief in the right to be human, and a world where we do not need to fear change, but can define change on a mutual footing and walk towards it hand in hand. So I almost end this talk with a question to myself. Why did I feel, when I am fully vaccinated and fully grown up, that I must be fully formed in order to be able to share with you what I have learned and even maybe to give some advice. Actually, all of us, even full-grown adults, are still becoming the people we are going to become. We are all muddling along. But in our dreams, maybe we glimpse something of what we want to be. In our poems, we say something of what we'd like to be, and we express that. For a minute or two, however, every day, I also fall victim to the instructions of the world and doubt the voice of my heart. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's just a question of not succumbing to the instructions of the world and remembering that we have voices, other voices we can listen to than the one that tells us we are not good enough and that what we believe is not really meaningful. So I'm going to end this on a Herculean note to myself. And I'm going to leave you with some pieces of advice that have stood me in good stead, what I have learned from other people who have shared their experiences with me, and which I think will actually help you as you are going to study for 5 years, and it's going to be tough, I guess, but also exciting and glorious. I think you should read a lot of poetry and listen to a lot of songs. I think you should learn to cook and learn to do things from scratch and really understand how they work. Most of all, I think you should make deep friendships with people of all ages and backgrounds. And you should work on making those friendships last through disagreement. Because in friendship, we conjure up something that isn't actually recognized in law or even given much social space by society. In friendship, we actually affirm the belief of our heart and create completely new ideas of relationality and fairness and kindness. And because it started raining when I started speaking to you, I also thought I would read you a poem. Because I've told you to read poems, right? So I should read you one to start with. It's called Love, Rain, Revolution, and it's by a poet called Raj Shekhar. It's in Hindi, but I'm going to read it in English, and I've done the translation. I know that poetry, well, my poetry anyway, won't unseat the tyrant, persuade the beloved, nor turn the clouds to rain. The hunter will not alter his intent, nor the woodcutter stay the axe. Whoever imagines poetry creates revolutions. And yet, to keep myself alive, or well, to seem alive, I keep writing something, because who knows, if I keep staying alive, love, rain, and revolution may one day arrive. So I hope rain, love, revolution, all of it arrives in your lives. I wish you a really exciting time at Nalsar. And I know that you're not on campus, but I've been to the campus and it's beautiful. So in my mind, I'm imagining an entire cohort of new students cycling down the road like movie stars used to do in old Hindi film songs, singing Main Chali, Dekho Pyar Ki Gali, Mujhe Roke Na Koi. I'm waiting excitedly to see what new world you'll craft for us, new meanings of justice and success that the voice in your hearts will bring for us who've had to live with a world that doesn't always accommodate every one of us. I wish you the best. And I also want to end, I won't sing, but end with a line from another Hindi film song, that even when people tell you that you're being a little bit crazy to do the things that you're doing, even when it feels like you're a little bit alone and lonely in your ideas, I think keep walking down that path, the paths from Nalsar to the many paths in the world that you'll walk on, because you'll always find other people like yourself eventually. And then you can all get together and sing a song that goes, Hum Hai Deewane, Phir Kaisa Dar. So good luck. And thank you again for inviting me to speak to you.
Thank you, Ms. Paramita. So my job here as the Master of Ceremony expects me to jot down the important points being said by the guest speaker and repeat those points and thank the speaker and move on. But I think I got so immersed in your talk that I have happily, kept that aspect of my job away from my priorities. And also, I think in the spirit of your talk, my non-adherence to the conventional expectations of my job as a master of ceremony, would be okay today. But I still think that as a law person and as somebody who's also emotional to some extent, I couldn't fail to take note of one particular point you said, and I'm sure students would carry that with them when they go on and study law, and which was that procedures are often so much about power and seldom about kindness and empathy. And this is something which I've also learned from Professor Dhanda while working under her as part of a team in the academic and examination committee. But I think the way you put it out today reinvigorates my own spirit to stay focused on this aspect of how we, govern, administer, regulate, etc. So I thank you at a personal level also for just putting it out so beautifully.